Now what we're discovering in Power Query is a lot of buttons are repeated in the ribbon, particularly between the transform and the add column. The add column tab is when you literally want to create a new column by formatting something or extracting something. Whereas, say you wanted to extract something and you wanted to extract it to a new column. Whereas the transform is when you want to not extract it to a new column, but actually transform that column, and the extracted results becomes that column. So it's important that you choose the right tab depending on what you're wanting to do. Now I want to have a bit of a play, a game with Power Query, and look at some of the things like formatting and extracting and things like that. And so I'm going to start with the Sales 2019 to 2021 query. Earlier we looked in a video at using the replace. We used the replace values button on the transform to replace litware space with litware and fabricum space with fabricum to get rid of the spaces. And that's what these steps are all here. I actually want to delete step 4, delete step 3, delete step 2, and delete step 1. So what that'll effectively do is take me back to the situation where if I click brand, I see fabricum twice because there's spaces after some of the fabricums, and litware twice because there's spaces after some of the litware. Now if you want to, you can actually trim data and get rid of and remove any unwanted spaces. So I'm going to go to transform because I want to transform this column, not add another column. And I'm going to go to the format button and I'm going to ask to use trim. And as I rest on it, it says it basically removes any leading and any trailing white spaces from each cell in the column. So if I hit the trim option and then I go and look at the drop down, it's trimmed the fabricums with spaces and the litware with spaces, and so I now only have one instance of each of those. So trim's actually quite good. So I'm going to go cancel and just close that off. The other thing I'd like to do is in the brand column, I'd like to replace all instances of limited with nothing. So I'm going to use the replace values and I'm going to type space limited because I literally want to get rid of space limited at the end of some of these things. And you don't have to put anything in the replace with. If you just go OK, you'll replace space limited with nothing. So I'm going to go OK. And that is great because that's just taken off all instances of limited in that column called brand. Now what I'd like to do is show you how you could do the opposite. What if I wanted to add a suffix that said space limited after every brand in this column? So for that, I would actually go into format and I would actually choose to add a suffix. And if I went space limited, then it will actually add this to the end of every value in that column. So I simply go OK. Yeah. Now what if I wanted to format this column to uppercase? If I click the format button, I have the option of lowercase, uppercase, capitalize each word. So I'm going to go for uppercase. And so that naturally formats the text in that column. Now I'd like to select the query called orders 1997 to 2000. And I want to add a column. So I'm going to go to add column. And I want to add a date column. So I'm going to hit this drop down here on date. And I'm wanting to extract the year from this date column and have it in a separate added column. So I go to date and I say year and year. And what it's done is actually created a column or added a column at the end called year, which has pulled out the year from that column. Now let's say I wanted to pull out the month. So I'll go to add column. I want to go to, hang on, let me go back to date. So I've got to select this column. I'll go to date and now I want to pull out the month. And do I want to pull out just the start of that month, the end of that month, the number of days in that month, a number that represents that month, or the actual name of the month? And so I'm going to have name of the month. And it's pulled out a column, put it at the end of my columns, called it month name, and it's pulled out the name of the month from that column I had selected, which was the first column called date. Now let's say I want to pull out the day from this column. and add a column. So I add a column, it's a date column, it's a day column, and the options I have here is I can pull out just the day, like the first, or the day of the week, or the day of the year, or the start day or the end day, or the name of the day. So I'm going to go for the name of the day. And so the 1st of the 11th, 1997, going by the last column, was in fact a Saturday. I want to move year, month, and day to after the date. So I'm going to click on year, hold the shift key, and click on day name. So I've selected those 3 columns, and then I'm just going to drag, and I'm going to drag to the left, and eventually it will start scrolling, and I will hit basically date, and I can drop it to the right of date. And that line shows me that those 3 columns have now been moved to the right of date. Let's go to the employees query. In the employees query, we've got a column called birth date. And what I'd like to do is create a new column. So therefore I'm going to add column. And I want it to be a column that tells me the age of the employee based on their birth date. So I go to the date button and I say I want age. And then basically I want to format that into total years. So I go to the duration button and I ask it to give me total years. I don't need fractions of years. And total years it is. And then I want to change this to a whole number. So I click the data type and change it from basically fixed or decimal to a whole number. And so now it shows a 1, 2, 3. And there I have the age of each of my employees. Now I want to move this to the right of birth date. I could drag it, or I could go to transform. I could go to move and move to the beginning. And that puts me closer to the birth date. And from there I could drag it to the right of birth date. So you can drag it, we can use the move button. Now let's say I want to apply that to my Power BI. So I go home, hit the drop down, click apply, and that will reconnect and refresh and reload the data to my Power BI file, which I can then turn around and save by clicking the save button in the top corner here. So I will now hit the save button, and that will save my model PBIX file.